And I want to talk to you about something really important that hasn't gotten as much or enough attention as it probably should, although that could change soon. Bad news tends to travel fast. We don't have bad news yet, according to criminal justice and regulatory experts, but we could. Let me explain why. The Supreme Court today is hearing a major case that regards a bedrock principle for any legitimate government, which is supposed to protect the public with laws and regulations. I'm going to keep this very clear. Laws are written by Congress, of course. The big laws can stand on their own. So if Congress bans discrimination in the Civil Rights Act, the government then enforces that law. And while people can debate whether they like it or not, we know what the Civil Rights Act says. The law part itself, the words of that rule are pretty straightforward. Then other areas require a lot more than just an original, generally written law. Take environmental or medical protections. They require a process where the government writes more regulations and technical details that evolve over time as science and reality evolves and changes. That logic is pretty clear. Congress sets a broad goal. We want clean air and water, or we want safe medicine. But then experts who work not in Congress, depending on who's elected, right, but experts who are chosen in the federal government, picked by various presidents in both parties, will define or refine what that means. So to, again, put this very simply, and then I'm going to play you some of what happened in the Supreme Court today. If you think of the EPA or Dr. Fauci, that's all part of that process. And that has been a pretty broadly accepted regulatory and legal process for a long time, about 4 decades of precedent if you're counting, the power of federal agencies to do that kind of stuff. But it is now under attack at the Supreme Court today. Challengers are taking the case there. And today's skirmish actually starts with something relevant to what you see on your screen. It's about, in its inception, fishing, specifically rules for fishing. But this case could actually give conservatives on the court a chance to do something that goes way beyond fishing. This gives them a kind of bait, if you will, to gut the existing powers to protect the public on everything from fishing rules to the broader environment to healthcare to technology. For example, artificial intelligence right now is moving really rapidly. And one basic idea for Congress, based on precedent, is to create a new agency of tech experts who would then write regulations over time, like an FDA or SEC, but for technology. There's even bipartisan support for that. But the hard right opposes that kind of federal power. Steve Bannon, for example, has spent years railing against what they call the administrative state. His fellow travelers are now hoping today, based on this argument, the court will take today's case arguments and then make a ruling to reverse all that precedent I mentioned. Could the court just stand up and say, 40 years, let's cancel it out? Well, led by these new Trump justices, that's what they did on abortion rights. The idea is to do that again here to kind of clip these so-called agency powers. And the Trump appointees today did sound skeptical on this. The New York Times reporting that they basically seem to be warming to Bannon's side and skeptical of the agencies and whether they are winning too often. Here's just a little part of how that point played out in court today.
One option would be to say it's ambiguous and therefore the agency always wins. That's what I understood Chevron to mean.
We haven't relied on Chevron over that time. I mean, have we overruled it in practice?
Now, you know how lawyers make things difficult. Sometimes judges make things even more difficult. What they're saying when they say Chevron is just talking about the old case that I mentioned that they might overrule. So that's the name of the case, just like Roe v. Wade. What they're really saying is maybe Chevron's already died. Maybe we can just pretend every time we overrule something that we're not violating the oaths they took, the speeches they gave, the testimony they gave about Roe and other super precedent. Now, I can also tell you that some of the Obama and Biden appointees were more precedent-friendly today, and Congress hands these powers, as I mentioned, it defers. It's basically even maybe very confident politicians who don't defer on other things in their life, they know they're not doctors. And so the justices were also asking about how the fact is that we know Congress has historically deferred to the people who know things.
if it's consistent with everything that we know that Congress has said, to defer to people who actually know things about these things.
Isn't it sort of impractical and chaotic to have a world in which every undefined term in a statute is subject to litigation?
This is one of those oral arguments today, and the reason why I only played a little bit of it, where the import and the clarity is almost in like complete reverse proportion to the jargon and the very oblique, recondite ways that they're talking. The bottom line is the Steve Bannon mission to gut the administrative state is barreling right through your Supreme Court. If you haven't heard a lot about that, because there's been a lot of other news going on, well, you're going to hear about it right now with one of our esteemed experts, NYU law professor Melissa Murray, who clerked for then Judge Sonia Sotomayor, who knows a thing or two about all of this. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
I challenge you to not talk about Chevron deference or any other of the assorted jargon that they made us do in law school, only because this is so much bigger and more important than that. What did you hear in the courtroom today, and why do so many corporate and business interests want to gut these federal powers?
Well, this was a case about fisheries and whether fisher boats have to have monitors on them that they pay for as per a federal regulation. But really, this entire question goes to the heart of what government does and whether administrative agencies will have the authority to regulate our water, our air, workplace safety, things of that nature. It's the very essence of government. And the reason why so many conservatives have had this particular case in their crosshairs for so long is that regulation makes it harder for corporate entities to make the kinds of outsized profits that they're interested in. Regulation makes it more expensive to operate. It makes it safer for workers and for the consumer, but it does require the regulated industry to absorb some of those costs itself. And if you're someone who wants to make a profit, you want the biggest profit you can. And that's why you're hostile to the prospect of regulation more generally.
And that's why today is about so much more than fishing. I think it's fair to say, right?
Yeah, it's the very essence of government. Everything we do, for the most part, all of our interactions with government are almost always filtered through administrative agencies.
Yeah.
So without the kind of deference that we give to agencies, it would all fall to Congress to actually regulate these things.
Well, you're the professor, not me, but you did say deference.
I mean, I didn't say Chevron deference, though, so
Okay.
I think I'm okay.
Oh, you're okay. You're good. I mean, you're the professor. You're going to issue the report card, not me. But I only joke about that because it gets so blurry. But what we're really saying is, if Congress says we need to regulate something, do you have this back-end way to dilute that or not? And again, it's not the job of traditional journalists or law professors to tell Congress or opine on exactly everything they should do. But we are talking about areas where they have already done something for decades. And in the medical arena, in the technology arena, in SEC, I mean, if you're trading and you got your retirement account there, you're a bank or a hedge fund with all of those equities, you've got laws in the books that say trading has to be fair. There can't be insider trading. There can't be these mechanisms that make it unfair. But over decades, the SEC updates that stuff. When there's some new digital breakthrough where people are using quasi-surveillance or other measures to do what amounts to insider trading, the SEC sits down and figures out whether that's fair or not. We don't have Congress try to make a new law every other year, every time there's a technological breakthrough, to rewrite securities laws. And I guess the question is, if they go far enough against this, is that the only alternative? Because that doesn't seem possible.
So you're exactly right. In most cases, Congress can't see around corners. They can't see what's coming in the distance. In many cases, the people who we've elected to Congress don't have the expertise to regulate in some of these areas where technology is really advanced and you need specialized expertise in order to regulate properly. So this means that we could have a situation where we're allowing untutored non-experts to make this kind of policy. But I think more realistically, what's going to happen here is that rather than agencies making these decisions, it's going to fall to federal courts to determine whether or not these regulations make sense and are consistent with the terms of the statute that Congress enacted in the 1970s or whenever Congress did this. And so that's an arrogation of power to the federal courts. And it's important to remember the federal courts right now are literally stocked with conservatives that were put in place during the Trump administration. Donald Trump, a president that was not elected by the popular vote, didn't win the popular vote, managed to put more federal judges in place than Barack Obama did in the same period of time, and indeed in 8 years worth of time. So there are a lot of conservative judges, and they're hostile to this kind of regulation, and that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. So my final question is big picture, even beyond this case. What does it tell you that in law, which is supposed to be more traditional, let alone our politics, which you don't have to get into tonight, that so-called conservatives, Federalist Society judges and justices who say they are conservative, are no longer conserving anything? They're not standing by precedent on matters large and small. They're openly musing about, well, maybe this isn't precedent anymore because it just evaporated, which is as postmodern a kind of a, electric Kool-Aid acid test kind of jurisprudence that you can get. What does it tell you that these, quote, conservatives don't want to conserve precedent anymore?
Well, I think it's even more interesting in that this was a decision that came out in the 1980s when the Reagan administration was controlling the EPA, and conservatives loved the Chevron doctrine when they had administrative agencies that were hostile to regulation in the first place. But now that there's this oscillation between the various parties, and now that they have a judiciary that's stocked with conservatives, it makes more sense for regulated industry and those who have antipathy for regulation to let this be handled by the federal courts. And so this is a really important issue for Americans. It's an anodyne technical question, but it goes to the very heart of government, and it goes to the very heart of this next election cycle. Because if there is a president who's elected from the Republican Party, you can be sure that two members of this Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, are likely to step down. They're in their 70s, which means that this 6-3 conservative supermajority that literally has no regard for precedent, as we have seen, will not only be in place for this generation, but probably a generation and a half ahead of us.
And
so this is for all the marbles.
Feel any better? I have already put evac on alert. He's ready to go if it comes to that. General, I can assure you.
Hey, General, let me into the war room to see you, so I had to hack my way onto this frequency.
This better be critical, Wheelie.
So, come on, what is it not, please? Okay, couple of things. I wanted low on the dough. I was thinking about taking a couple of months sick leave, maybe starting today. And, oh yeah. I intercepted a transmission from Megatron.
Then send it through.
Yes, sir, right away, sir. And so I was so damn good on the other stuff.
This is your last warning, insects. Relinquish what remains of the Allspark.
So who's the insect? You? What? Who's the insect?
Protect you. They were defeated on our world, and we will defeat them here.
This was just a diversion. Security, please bring up. Rabbit, she's already inside. Deeds, give me an update on that reserve. What's readiness? What was his name? What was it?
Evac, sir.
Right, evac.
She's right in front.
We're facing a heavy sustained attack. They appear to be after the Allspark. General! General! Need this immediately. Hold on. National security advisor. Stay down. Check it out. The mission is outrageous. The amateurs on a suicide mission.